The boardroom fell silent as my mother slid the contract across the polished oak table. Sign it, Violet, or watch your career burn to the ground. I stared at the clause demanding I publicly denounce any alternative lifestyle and distance myself from Anya immediately. My heart raced, but the pen felt heavier than the empire we built. Little did I know this forced betrayal of my marriage would lead to a power shift no one saw coming. It had started so differently 5 years ago at a Harvard alumni mixer in Boston. Anya Voss caught my eye across the room, her sharp intellect matching her sharp suit. We talked for hours about market disruptions and ethical investing, but it was the way she challenged my views on risk that hooked me. By the end of the night we were sharing secrets in a quiet corner, and within months we were married in a small ceremony in Vermont away from the prying eyes of my family. Harrington Dynamics was my birthright, a tech firm my father built from nothing in San Francisco. My mother Eleanor and brother Marcus had always made it clear that the company's image was everything conservative investors' traditional values, the works. Revealing a lesbian marriage would tank the upcoming IPO, and the merger talks with Sterling Capital, a firm run by old-school board members who still quoted Bible verses in meetings. So I signed. I told Anya that night in our hidden apartment in Pacific Heights that it was temporary, just until the deal closed. I love you more than this company, I said, but the words tasted like ash. She nodded, her green eyes steady, but I saw the hurt. I know the game, Violet. Just don't lose yourself in it. The next weeks were a blur of public appearances. I attended galas alone, smiled for cameras, even let Marcus set up a fake date with a male colleague for a charity event. The press ate up Violet Harrington, the rising star keeping the family legacy alive. But behind closed doors the arguments with Anya grew sharper. She understood the logic, the cause and effect, hide now thrive later. But her patience was wearing thin as my promotions came at the cost of our time together. Then came the first real test. The board was pushing for cost cuts to sweeten the merger. A department of 20 engineers, including my longtime mentor, who had supported me through my early days, was on the chopping block. I knew firing them would signal ruthlessness to investors, but it would also destroy lives. Anya advised against it over a tense dinner. You're becoming what they want, not what you are. But I did it anyway. The pink slips went out and the stock ticked up. My mother praised me for the first time in years. You're finally thinking like a Harrington. The promotion to COO followed weeks later. Yet that night Anya didn't come home until dawn. When she did, she said nothing, but the distance was there, a crack in our foundation that I pretended not to see. The cause was clear, my ambition. The effect, her withdrawal. And it was only the beginning. The merger negotiations intensified. Sterling Capital's CEO, a man named Richard Langford, made it clear during a private dinner that any hint of personal scandal would kill the deal. We like clean images, Violet. Family values sell. I nodded, smiled, and ordered another drink while inside I felt the walls closing in. Back at the apartment, Anya waited with takeout and a quiet question. How long do we keep pretending? I snapped back that survival demanded sacrifices. She didn't argue, but the way she turned away told me everything. The next morning I found a note on the counter. I support you, but I won't disappear. That was when the real pressure started. Marcus began leaking rumors to the board that I was too soft, too distracted. Eleanor called daily, reminding me of the family legacy, my father's heart attack, the empire he left in my hands. I doubled down on work, 16-hour days, board meetings, strategy sessions, all while Anya grew quieter. She started traveling more for her own consulting firm, but I knew it was an excuse. Our texts became shorter, our nights apart longer. One evening, after a particularly brutal strategy session where I had to vote against a diversity initiative to appease investors, I came home to find Anya packing a bag. I need space, Violet. This hiding is eating us both alive. I begged her to stay, promised it would end soon, but the look in her eyes was one of resignation, not anger. She left for a week in Chicago, and when she returned the distance had hardened into something colder. I told myself it was necessary, the company came first, the IPO would secure our future. But deep down I knew each step forward was costing me the only person who truly saw me. The quarterly earnings call went better than expected. Stock jumped 8% and the merger was greenlit for the next phase. Eleanor pulled me aside in the hallway, her voice low and sharp. Keep it up, Violet. No slip-ups. If anyone even whispers about that woman from college, you're done. I nodded, swallowing the bile rising in my throat. Anya was no longer just my wife, she had become the ghost I couldn't mention. That night I drove to our old spot, the overlook above the Golden Gate Bridge where we had celebrated our secret wedding anniversary 2 years earlier. The fog rolled in thick and I sat alone in the car replaying every promise I had broken. My phone buzzed with a message from Anya. Heard the news. Congrats on the deal. When do I get my wife back? I typed a reply then deleted it. Instead I called Marcus and agreed to the fake engagement. He had been pushing a public relationship with a young executive from legal named David. It was all optics, he said. Just dinner photos, a few events. No one gets hurt. But I knew it would hurt the one person who mattered most. The fake date started innocently enough. David was kind, professional, and completely unaware of the real reason. We attended a tech conference in Austin, posed for photos, and laughed at scripted jokes. The tabloids loved it. Violet Harrington finally settling down. Investors sent congratulatory emails. Eleanor even smiled during the next board meeting. But Anya saw the photos online. When I got home, she was waiting in the living room, her laptop open to the gossip site. This is how you protect us. Her voice was steady but her hands trembled. I tried to explain the logic: the short-term pain for long-term gain. The merger would make us untouchable. She stood up and for the first time raised her voice. Untouchable for who, Violet? For your mother. For the board? Not for me. She walked out and this time I didn't stop her. The next 3 weeks were hell. I threw myself into work finalizing due diligence on the merger, while Marcus leaked more details to the press about my supposed engagement. Anya stopped answering my calls. Her consulting firm announced a major new client, one that required her to be in New York full-time. I knew it was deliberate separation. During a late-night strategy session with the Sterling team, Richard Langford pulled me aside. Heard about the engagement. Smart move. Keeps things clean. I smiled through gritted teeth while inside the guilt gnawed deeper. Then the first irreversible loss hit. My mentor, the one I had fired months earlier, reached out with a lawsuit. The claim was discrimination based on age and subtle hints about my personal life leaking through the grapevine. The legal team warned it could delay the merger by months. Eleanor demanded I settle quietly and make an example. I did what she asked, paid him off, and issued a statement praising company values. The board applauded my decisiveness. Stock stabilized. But Anya read the news and sent one last text. I thought you were better than this. Maybe I was wrong. That message sat on my screen for hours. I drove to her favorite cafe in the Mission District hoping to find her, but the barista said she hadn't been in weeks. The cause and effect chain was crystal clear. My choices to protect the image were pushing her further away. Yet the promotion to interim CEO came the next day. Eleanor hugged me in front of the entire executive team. Your father would be proud. I smiled for the cameras while inside something fundamental broke. The empire was growing but the foundation of my life was crumbling, and I had no one left to blame but myself. The annual shareholder meeting was scheduled for the end of the quarter, and the merger closing party was already being planned at the Fairmont. I spent the weeks leading up to it in damage control mode, smoothing over investor concerns about the lawsuit fallout, and pushing through more cost-saving measures that meant another round of layoffs. Marcus was my constant shadow, reminding me daily that any personal distraction could sink the deal. One photo with the wrong person and Sterling walks. I nodded and kept my head down even as the silence from Anya stretched into months. I told myself she was protecting herself, that the space was mutual, but every night the empty side of the bed reminded me of the truth. The hiding had become its own kind of prison. Then the rumor started circulating in the executive suites. Someone had seen Anya at a hedge fund conference in Chicago talking with major institutional investors. At first I dismissed it as coincidence, but when the proxy filings began showing unusual activity, large blocks of shares moving through anonymous trusts, I started paying attention. The board grew nervous. Eleanor called an emergency meeting. We cannot afford activist investors right now. Find out who's buying and neutralize it. I volunteered to look into it personally, using every contact I had. What I discovered chilled me. The trusts traced back through layers of LLCs, but the signature pattern, the strategic timing, it all screamed Anya. She wasn't just consulting anymore, she was positioning herself as a player. When I confronted her over a hurried phone call in my office, she didn't deny it. Someone has to protect our future since you won't. Her voice was calm, professional, but the undercurrent of pain was unmistakable. I hung up and stared at the stock ticker on my screen. The shares were climbing, and with them the invisible hand tightening around the company I thought I controlled. The merger party arrived anyway. I stood on the stage in a tailored black dress, smiling beside David for the cameras while Eleanor toasted the future of Harrington Dynamics. Inside I felt nothing but hollow. Anya was nowhere to be seen, but I knew she was watching. The next morning the first proxy battle notice arrived. An anonymous group was calling for a special vote on board composition citing governance concerns. Marcus stormed into my office. "This is sabotage. We need to fight back." I agreed and spent the next 48 hours in backroom calls rallying allies, buying time. But every move I made felt reactive, as if someone had anticipated my every step. The cause was my years of prioritizing the company. The effect was losing control without even realizing it. During a late strategy session, Eleanor looked at me with something close to disappointment. "You've changed, Violet. The old you would have crushed this already." I didn't argue because she was right. The woman who once fought for every inch of power had traded her soul for approval, and now the bill was coming due. The special shareholder meeting was set for the following week, and the tension in the office was thick enough to cut. I spent every waking hour preparing my defense, lining up votes, reviewing bylaws, and trying to trace the activist group. Anya remained silent, no calls, no texts. I told myself it was better this way, that the separation gave me clarity, but the truth was I missed her with an ache that no amount of work could dull. Marcus suggested hiring a private investigator to dig into the trusts, but I vetoed it. Some lines I still refused to cross, even if the empire demanded it. The night before the meeting I sat alone in the boardroom, staring at the empty chairs, and replayed every decision that had led here. The firings, the fake engagement, the silenced arguments with Anya. Each one had seemed logical at the time, cause and effect perfectly aligned for survival. Now they formed a chain that was choking me. The meeting began at 9 sharp. The room was packed with institutional reps, analysts, and a handful of reporters. Eleanor opened with her usual polished speech about legacy and growth. Then the floor opened for proxy votes. The first surprise came when a representative from one of the trusts stood and proposed a complete board overhaul. The vote was close, but the momentum shifted when more blocks aligned against us. I watched in stunned silence as the numbers rolled in. By the time the final tally hit the screen, the truth crashed over me. 62% of the shares were now controlled by a single entity. The representative stepped forward and removed her sunglasses. It was Anya. She looked composed, powerful, and utterly calm as she addressed the room. Effective immediately, I exercised my rights as majority shareholder. The board is dissolved and new leadership will be installed. Gasps echoed. Eleanor turned white. Marcus slammed his fist on the table. I could only stare at the woman I had married in secret, the one I had pushed away in the name of ambition, now holding the keys to everything. Anya didn't look at me during the chaos that followed. She outlined her plan calmly, a new vision focused on ethical governance, diversity, and long-term innovation. The room hung on her every word. When the meeting adjourned, Eleanor cornered me in the hallway, her voice a hiss. "This is your fault. You brought that woman into our lives." I didn't defend myself because part of me agreed. The irreversible loss was complete, the family empire no longer ours, and the marriage I had hidden now the instrument of its fall. Anya waited for me in the private lounge afterward. She didn't smile, didn't accuse. She simply said, "I gave you every chance to choose us first. You chose the company. So I chose for both of us." The words landed like a final verdict. The cause, my repeated sacrifices. The effect, her quiet takeover. And in that moment I understood that love and power could not coexist under the rules I had accepted. The days after the meeting blurred into a whirlwind of legal filings, press conferences, and emergency board transitions. Anya moved swiftly, installing new directors and announcing a strategic pivot that included the very diversity initiatives I had once voted down. Investors who had threatened to pull out stayed because her vision promised higher returns without the old baggage. Eleanor and Marcus were removed from all positions, their shares diluted to minority status. The family name remained on the building, but the control was gone. I was offered a role as strategic advisor, a face-saving position with no real power. I accepted because the alternative was walking away with nothing. Anya and I didn't speak privately for weeks. She was everywhere in the media now, the visionary shareholder reshaping Harrington Dynamics, and I was the former golden child reduced to a footnote. The first time we were alone came during the final merger paperwork signing. Sterling Capital had walked away citing the governance changes, but Anya had already lined up better partners. We sat across from each other in the same boardroom where it all began. She slid the final documents toward me, her expression unreadable. "Sign and you're free to stay or go. Your choice this time." I picked up the pen but paused. "Why did you do it this way? You could have told me." She leaned back, her eyes steady. "You stopped listening the day you signed that first contract. I tried to warn you every step. You chose survival over us. So I ensured our survival without you having to choose again." The logic was flawless. My ambition had created the vacuum she filled. The losses were permanent family estrangement, lost trust, and a company that no longer felt like home. Yet sitting there I realized the one thing she hadn't taken was the love I still carried. It was damaged, scarred by every cold decision, but it remained. The restructuring continued. I watched from the sidelines as Anya implemented changes that actually improved morale and innovation. Employees who had feared the old regime now praised the new direction. Marcus tried one last desperate lawsuit claiming undue influence, but it was dismissed within days. Eleanor stopped calling. The empire I had sacrificed everything to protect was thriving without me at the helm, and the irony burned. Anya never gloated, never rubbed it in. She simply did what I had been too afraid to do: protect the future on her own terms. Late one evening, after a long strategy review, I found her in the executive lounge staring out at the city lights. I approached cautiously. I was wrong. About all of it. She turned, and for the first time in months her expression softened. "I know. But wrong doesn't erase the damage." The conversation ended there, but the door between us cracked open just enough to let in a sliver of possibility. Months passed and the company stabilized under Anya's leadership. I stayed in my advisory role, contributing where I could, but the power I once craved no longer defined me. We began talking again, short meetings over coffee, then longer dinners where we avoided the past and focused on the future. The hiding was over, the marriage no longer a secret, though the press spun it as a surprising alliance rather than the truth. Anya never demanded I leave the company, and I never asked her to step down. We existed in a careful balance where love and ambition no longer fought but coexisted uneasily. The family had disowned me publicly, but in quiet moments I wondered if the price had been worth it. The irreversible losses remained: the fractured relationship with Eleanor and Marcus, the colleagues I had sacrificed, and the years of distance with Anya. Yet the woman I loved was still here, stronger and more herself than ever. One evening on the same rooftop balcony where we had once celebrated in secret, Anya turned to me. "We survived, Violet. Not the way either of us planned, but we survived." I took her hand and for the first time in over a year felt the warmth without the shadow of fear. The empire had changed hands, the image had cracked, and the secrets were laid bare, but the core of us remained. The cause and effect chain that had nearly destroyed us had instead reshaped everything into something more honest. As the city lights stretched below, I realized the greatest power wasn't control of the boardroom, it was the courage to stop hiding. True or false? Ambition always requires sacrificing the people you love most to survive in the corporate world.